What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the bearded comic bro, and I am joined by comic creator Ed Brisson. Welcome to the show,
Hey, thanks a lot for having me.
man. I'm excited. I can literally, I'm going down the list of all the stuff you've created, and I can't read it all because you've created a lot of stuff. But you have been behind some great, like currently, with Alpha Flight, and you just finished up a run since the Salton Sea with AWA, and your Deathstroke and Old Man Logan. Like I could go on and on, but we want to talk all about comics. So welcome to the show.
Sure.
I'm excited to talk to you.
All right. Well, thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. So I always like to know, did you always have a love for comics growing up, or did this kind of come about later in life?
I always did. I always loved reading growing up. And I'm one of those. I feel like there's a whole secret society of kids who were in the hospital in the 80s and had someone drop off a stack of comic books, and that's how they got hooked on comic books. And that's basically me. I was in and out of hospital a few times when I was younger. I can't remember why I was there at this time, but I remember someone just dropped off a stack of like comics. I couldn't even tell you what they were. Like half the covers were missing, that sort of thing. And that's what initially got me into comics. And then my mom used to like drag us down to the used bookstore every week, and back then we got $2 a week in allowance, and they had the 10-cent bins at the store we went to. So I would just buy stuff from the 10-cent bin to read. And I kind of just got into comics initially, just reading the most random stuff, like not anything in order. I was just grabbing back issues and just reading, and then started following stuff, after a while.
I feel like that's a lot of our journeys as young comic readers of picking up stuff in the secondhand stores and not realizing that like I'm reading a Batman story that makes no sense because I haven't read the other upcoming parts and I'm not going to read the next parts, but I just pick up what I could get.
Yeah, I mean, and that was kind of the thing. Like, trying to get to into X-Men way back when was like pretty daunting because it felt like you always come in the middle of a big story. But you just figured it out. You've and there was always enough contextual stuff there to figure out what was going on, and you just hopped on it and went around for went along for the journey.
So where was this then for you of, you had a love for comics and, started to get into it. Where was the writing aspect where you're like, this is something I want to pursue as a career?
The writing aspect wasn't there originally. I wanted to be a comic book artist when I was younger. I loved drawing, so I used to draw all the time as a kid, and I used to write all the time as a kid as well. Um, but I'm gonna go off from what I normally talk about because I feel like I've told the same origin story a million times. But so when I was younger, I used to write and I used to draw, but not together. Like I would write
Okay.
short stories and stuff that now would be called fan fiction. Back in the 80s, there wasn't really a term for it. And I stopped writing because I had a French teacher at my school who took away a story that I'd been writing in class. I was done my work and I was just working on the story, but because I wasn't doing schoolwork, she took the story away. And I used to be a big horror film fan. And so a lot of my fiction was like, stories about Freddy or Jason or Michael
Okay.
Myers or Leatherface, Cujo. I was obsessed with Cujo for a long time. And so it was like pretty brutally violent stuff that I would write. And I was 11, 10, 11, 12. And I went to a Catholic school, and just so I could maintain some sort of street cred, where I grew up in Ontario, Catholic school, they're public. It wasn't a
Okay.
private school. It's just like
Yeah.
they have like the public school system and the Catholic school system. They're both funded by taxpayer money. You can go to either. There's no cost. Just one sucks a lot more than the other. Um, and I was in the Catholic school system, and my teacher took away the story and ended up becoming this massive thing where the principal got involved, my parents got involved, like my mom got involved, and children's services got involved because the school and teacher were so concerned about some of the stuff I'd been writing. Um, and so it was a whole embarrassing thing. And it was interesting because my mom worked with uh, sort of like victim services is the easiest way to
Yeah.
describe it. So she kind of knew already some of these people from the I think it's called the Child Welfare Society or whatever it is in Ontario. And so she kind of knew them, and it was like a really sort of embarrassing thing all around. There's no reason they should have been called in.
Yeah.
I was just a horror film junkie. So because of that, I stopped writing for a long time. Like I stopped writing from the age of about 12 until I want to say until I was in my early 20s, late teens, early 20s.
Okay.
And but I was obsessed with art. When Todd McFarlane came around in sort of the late 80s, I was absolutely obsessed with him. I loved his artwork. I It was exciting, being Canadian. I didn't realize at the time that John Byrne was Canadian, but you don't see a lot of Canadians in comics or back then. And it always felt like a thing where you had to live in New York to become a comic book artist. Seeing this Canadian, I was pretty excited, and I just focused on honing my art skills, and I went to fine arts to try and become a better artist, and it did like that didn't really work out. I dropped out after like a year and a half. But I when I started trying to get into comics in like I wanted to self-publish comics in the
Yeah.
early 90s, and there was no internet like there is now. So I met a couple comic book writers through like the comic stores I went to. Some local guys who wanted to get into writing comics, and it was just such a terrible fit in both cases with both writers. They were both almost like interchangeable people in that they believed they were big idea guys, and artists were just there to like realize their ideas. It wasn't a partnership.
Yeah.
It was like a thing where you were just there to bring their brilliance to the world. And they were like not good writers. We were teenagers, so obviously, but I do remember the one guy who had this story. It had ended, and it was all a dream, and I was so fucking mad. It was so bad, like it was just so weirdly bad. But was so arrogant about it and such a jerk,
Yeah.
not just to me, but anyone who he wanted to work with him. That it kind of soured me on the relationship between artists and writers. I didn't have any access to anyone else, so I just started writing again, so I would have stuff to draw. And I think I started self-publishing stuff in '94, and from '94 to 2010, I just wrote, drew, colored, lettered. I did everything and self-published a bunch of mini comics. And then it was like after 16 years of doing it that I realized that I just really wasn't. I hated drawing. I just did not like that part of the job, and I really loved writing. And so I just stopped drawing in 2010 and just focused on writing. And it was through there that I started doing a series called Murder Book, which is like a short crime stories that I was doing in black and white that I would write. And then I knew some artists who came in and drew them, like Simon Roy, Michael Walsh, Johnny Christmas, Jason Copeland, etc. And it was through those that I ended up kind of getting on the radar of publishers and getting work, with Marvel and DC, etc.
Nice. So you were doing the whole gamut of creating comics, for 16 years, and then like you said, you started to focus. How did that process help you then? I'm assuming it helped you now as a writer of interacting with artists and letters and things. Like, did it prep you to know how to
I think
interactions?
I think so. I think it better prepared me for dealing with being able to chat with artists and letterers. I was never a terribly good colorist, even though I colored my own work. So coloring is still this like it's a weird alchemy to me. Like I can get things to a place where they're like, if I'm working or if I can give notes where they're like good, but for me to push the good to great, it's
Yeah.
always a very difficult um sort of a note process for me. And so that one's tough. But yeah, I find that like having had that experience, it helps me just have those conversations when I'm asking for something, or when I'm having conversation with with an artist and we're trying to figure something out. It helps me. Like I feel like I can speak the same language. I know how to kind of say what I need, or what I mean. And also, like, a thing that I didn't really touch on there is I did a lot of lettering work for years. So I did letter professionally for years. I had sort of picked that up along the way as sort of a side gig, which also helped me in, like, I know the whole print side of things too.
Yeah.
I actually went back to school for print, for publishing. So I know how to deal with printers and all that sort of stuff. So my whole thing when I was coming up is I just want to learn every aspect of the job so I could be as self-sufficient as possible, going out.
Yeah. So your next step is you have to own a shop, right? And then sell all the books.
I briefly ran a small publishing company, like, for a few
Well, there
years,
you go.
and I don't want that sort of responsibility ever again. I can't imagine owning a store and being responsible for employees and such.
Oh, that's so good. Well, one of your more recent things that you currently have Alpha Flight, you have some stories going on in the Batman Brave and the Bold. But one that I just recently read, that I wanted to kind of hit on real quick and then talk about some of your new stuff that you got coming out is Sins of the Salton Sea. It's your book with AWA. Um, what a cool story and a unique concept and just how you framed it. Like, where did this idea for this story kind of come about?
That one was a strange one in that it was actually two different ideas that I had that I kind of like peanut butter and chocolate together, like, I was working on a heist story. I wanted to do like like I love writing crime,
Mm,
uh, like crime comics, and I'd always wanted to do a heist story, like a kind of fun heist story, but it just wasn't like I had this sort of concept I was playing around with, and I wanted to play around with like some tropes, like the one last job, two brothers, etc. But it just wasn't working. I wasn't the piece to make it work wasn't there, and I couldn't figure it out. And it was just I was sort of banging away at it, and at the same time I was doing I had this idea for a book about a cult, and I can't say too much about like what the idea is without actually really spoiling
right.
Sins of the Salton Sea. But I had the concept for the book about a cult that's essentially a doomsday cult, and I knew it was going to end the way that the Sins of the Salton Sea ends. So I had
Yeah.
that part of the cult thing, but I didn't have like it's just like there was something missing there too, and I was going back and forth on these two different things. And then at like one point, it was like tripping and getting my chocolate and the peanut butter. I was like, oh shit! If I just merge these two things, they each solve the problem that I was having with the other. And yeah, it worked out beautifully. I was really happy
Yeah.
with how that book came together.
And was this something that you had already had and then you presented to AWA, or was that something that they're like Axel's like, hey, we want you to create something for us, or
It was so Axel was the editor who brought me into Marvel, when I like came in for Bullseye, and then when I had my several years of working there. And I always really liked working with Axel. He's a really tough editor, but he's a really smart editor. And I feel like when you're a writer, there's some editors you like working with a lot because you feel like they get the best out of you, and that's Axel for me. And so when he left Marvel and he started AWA, he had approached me about pitching stuff to them, but at the time I was under an exclusive, so I couldn't pitch anything to them. But when that ended, yeah, I did want to work with him again. So I sent him this pitch, just saying like, here, I just had the sort of rough shape of it. I think we made a few changes to it here and there, but essentially kind of what it is, what it ended up being. And I pitched it to him, and then he, gave some thoughts and stuff, and then we just kind of workshopped it until it became what it is. But it was a thing that I pitched to AWA. Like it was, I think I kind of
yeah,
developed and pitched to send to them. Yeah.
yeah. There must be something about the name Ed that likes to write crime books, huh? So there,
Yeah. I don't know what it is. Actually, it's funny when I first started out, when I first was getting work in comics, I was going to use my middle name as my first, on my books, just because I was worried about that. We have similar names and we both write crime comics. Um, yeah, I don't know what it is.
Uh, something it's something about it, but it's so good. Well, we've been talking a lot about your stuff that you've worked on and have been working on for a while, but you have two series that are coming out soon that I'm really excited to talk about. One of them is the Displaced, right? With
Yep.
Boom Studios, and you just tweeted about it just a little bit ago as I was getting ready to hop on this, and I read the log line and everything, and saw some of the pages from, and holy buckets, it looks so good.
Thanks, man. I'm really excited about this book. This is actually so Oshawa, Ontario is a city that's about an hour outside of Toronto, and that's where the Displaced is set. And that's where I grew up. I lived
Okay.
there until I was 14. And so part of this book is it's kind of this like you know, I don't know if you've ever like grown up somewhere and then moved away and then you go back, and it's this weird thing where it's like almost like a double forgetting, like kind of the city changes so much that you don't recognize it anymore. And then when you leave, you know, every time you go back, there are fewer and fewer people there who you know, right? And so this came just from that, from me having moved cross country when I was 14. And then every time I go back to Oshawa, it was just like, you know, fewer people I knew were still there. So I had like less connection to it. So this is kind of about being completely untethered from a place. But I started working on this book. I think that I came up with the idea back in 2008 and started like kind of developing it and actually pitched it to a publisher in 2011. It was almost my very first published work. You know, me and another artist had pitched it, but it wasn't quite like that. We had actually had a lot of back and forth with the publisher and just ended up not doing it. But yeah, it's just this thing that I've been like just playing with forever. And it wasn't until I think, you know, when it didn't happen with that publisher, I was relieved because there was like, again, it was like a part that
Yeah,
was missing, and I needed that part still. And over the years, I would just take it out of the drawer, you know, once a year or so, and play around with it and try and figure out how to make it work. And it was during the pandemic that was like it all kind of fell into place. And yeah, I reached out to Luca Casalinguida. Oh my god, brutalized his name here. Um, you know, see if he wanted to draw
yeah.
it. He's such a great fit. I love his style. And yeah, and then you know we pitched this to Boom. Obviously, it's coming out next month. It comes out on Valentine's Day in February.
Ooh, it's a great gift. Take your significant
It's a
other to
great.
the comic book store.
Forget the flowers. Forget the flowers. Just get them a variant copy of the Displaced #1.
So, you said it's kind of about this your hometown you kind of grew up in, and there. What was kind of the elevator pitch that you gave the Boom of, if someone wants to check out what this series is?
So it's yeah, that's kind of like the feeling that I mentioned earlier, and I guess I
Yeah.
should have. That's not what it's not about. Like it's not like some sort of navel gazing story about like missing your hometown. It's the pitch is basically Oshawa, Ontario, the city and the 170,000 people who live there vanish one night. It's just gone. There's like a quake like event, and there's a pit. It's gone. Nobody knows what happened to the people. And then and we start following. The book follows roughly about 6 people who are outside of town, who are from Oshawa, who are outside of town when it happens, and they're just trying to figure out what happened. You know, what happened to the family,
Yeah.
what happened to their homes, what happened to their jobs, etc. And gradually, like, as time moves on, over the course of about 3 or 4 days, the you know, I'm spoiling the book here, but I think these are like what makes a book work more as a character stuff, and not maybe not these moments, but what happens is the hole where the city is, it heals over the period. It just like it closes up as though Oshawa was just never there, and people start realizing or the survivors start realizing that people are just forgetting that
Hmm.
Oshawa existed. And the problem that spins out of that is that then people forget that these survivors existed, and then no one can hold a memory of them. No one, you know, so it's all of a sudden these survivors trying to survive in a world that can't. and doesn't remember them, and all the sort of complications that brings, like, how do you survive when you can't open a bank account, you can't rent a place, you can't buy a place, you can't own a car, you can't get a phone contract, etc. So it's kind of like, I like to describe it as sort of like a Twilight Zone type story.
Yeah.
I grew up on Twilight Zone, so I love that sort of stuff. And so this is, yeah, it's a 5 issues series about these people just trying to survive, and the ways that they try and do that in sometimes very brutal ways. So there will be obviously like kind of a schism between the group and how they decide to proceed.
You just wanted to make your French teacher disappear. So you're like, let's
Oh my god. Wherever
let's
she
just
is,
make the
yeah.
whole school disappear. So you mentioned, I'm curious. You mentioned Twilight Zone. Do you have a favorite episode of Twilight Zone?
So one of my favorite episodes is actually it's from the 80s Twilight Zone, which I think is underrated. I think
Yeah,
it
okay.
doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. And it's called Button Button. It's based on a Richard Matheson short
Okay.
story. It was later adapted into a film as well, which is terrible, called The Box.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
but so the episode is the setup is essentially, it's a working class couple that is struggling to get by, and a man shows up on the doorstep, and he's got a box with a glass dome on top and a red button, and he tells them that if they press the button, they'll get a large sum of money. I think it's $20,000. But someone will die, and they ask
Yeah.
who, and he's like, "Don't worry, it's not anyone you know." And then he just leaves it, and it's, the whole episode is just them stressing out about whether or not, because they could really use the money, but obviously they don't want to be responsible for somebody dying.
Right.
And yeah, I don't want to spoil the episode, but it's one of my favorites.
That's so good. I feel like I've had a couple creators on where they've mentioned the Twilight Zone. So I'm always, like, that actually is a question I've asked multiple times now. What's your favorite
Nice. Yeah,
episode?
I grew up on that. I love Twilight Zone.
So, and then you also have a new Predator book coming out. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, it comes out February 21st, so it's our third Predator series at Marvel. This one, we have Francisco Mana on art. Is doing an incredible job. For anyone who's been following along with the Predator, we have our main protagonist, Theta, whose parents were killed by a predator when she was about 14, and she's sort of dedicated her life to hunting down predators. So the book is largely about predators being hunted rather than predators hunting. So in the first volume, it's her trying to find this three-mandible predator who killed her parents. The second volume, we go back to the hunting preserve from that movie, The Predators, and we sort of introduce a couple of, like, what I think are pretty fun crinkles in the Predator lore. The main one being that predators, to stalk their hunting planet, they grab people from Earth and drop off of the planet, which we know, but they do keep them in stasis. So you can have people on that planet who are from the 80s and people who are from 2050. The third volume is about Theta and Palo are now out trying to find these sort of what they dubbed stasis farms, where they're keeping these people that they bring to their hunting grounds. And so this is Theta, they finally have a lead on this after 6 years of looking. Each book we jump forward about 6 years. So her and Palo finally have a lead, but it looks, they're basically going right into the belly of the beast to try and retrieve these stasis pods and return people back to Earth.
How did you get connected with working on the Predator franchise here?
Marvel called me up and asked me during the pandemic at some point, like sometime in 2020. It took a while for the whole thing to come together.
Oh yeah.
But they called and asked if I'd have any interest, and I absolutely, I'm a Predator. Like I grew up, I probably growing up probably watched Predator and Predator 2, I don't know, 100 times each. I was on a podcast years ago defending Predator 2 as being a good film. But yeah, so I just, I was a huge fan of the films. And so when they offered it to me, it was like a very easy yes for me. Something I
Yeah.
was pretty excited to sink my teeth into. And funny enough, going back to stories that get us in trouble when we're younger, is the basic sort of premise for the first Predator is very loosely based on some story that I wrote when I was in elementary school. Very like very loosely based. Obviously much changed, but when I was younger, I had a very similar Predator fan fiction type thing that I had been working on, and sort of resurrected that idea, and obviously made it better. But yeah, it was just a funny thing to have in my back pocket when they called me and asked.
You're like, well, actually,
Yes.
I, I do. Is it is it for you, creating stories like, obviously your time at Marvel, like, and stuff with DC and Predator, like you're having to dive into these worlds that have already been created and rules have been established. How has that changed for you of when it's something working with, already properties that have already been created and worlds that exist with something different where, stuff that you're coming up with? Does it change how you write a story or your process?
Yeah, yes and no. Like I think
Yeah.
I have like my own sort of inclinations when I'm sitting down to write a project. Obviously, when I'm writing something that already exists, there are rules in place. There are things I can't do, either like Marvel or DC or the licensors aren't going to let me do it. I often still try and push and see what I can get away with, but there's boundaries, and I think sometimes having those boundaries are fun, like trying to figure out a way to really build a big story within like this contained space that you have. Um, but yeah, doing my own thing, yeah, I just do whatever the hell I want. So there, it's completely different. It's in that regard. But I find like once you get down to brass tacks, the actual writing is it's not terribly different. I think with a big two book or something like that, there is still that thing in the back of your mind that you might have to make sure that you're keeping that character true to who they are. And then there is that worry too, like of like screwing up continuity, or doing something that yeah, basically just fucks up continuity. Whereas when it's your own continuity, and you don't have to worry,
You know,
like you're building it as you go.
so, well, Ed, I want to respect your time, and and like I said, we could talk about your work in comics for so long because you have written a lot of great stuff. Is there anything that
Thanks.
you are working on currently or got coming up that we haven't hit on that you want to touch on real quick, or have we?
So I do have stuff I'm working on, but nothing I can actually talk about, I'm afraid.
Sounds
Uh,
good to me.
I I've got a straight crime book that I'm working on right now that'll come out sometime later this year, and another horror thing, but again later this year. So hopefully they'll be announced fairly soon.
Nice. So, where can people follow along with you of what you're working on so they know when stuff comes out?
I think the easiest place is just find me on Twitter at Ed Brisson. You can go to my website if you like, at it's edbrisson.com. You can subscribe to my newsletter there. I update it infrequently, so you don't have to worry about getting a ton of emails from me. But I do, like with big updates.
Mhm.
I try and update things there. And yeah, if you keep an eye on my Twitter, I'm doing a tour in February where I'll be hitting. I think it's up to 7 or 8 stores now, all around the sort of east coast of Canada and the U.S. To promote the release of the Displaced, and we'll be actually doing the first kickoff in Oshawa, where the book takes place. So very excited
I
about that.
I saw that. I saw the kind of the map. That is quite the extensive journey that you're going on.
It's not too. I realized I called it a mini tour, and then someone messaged me and was like, "How is that mini?" But last year, or in 2022, I guess I did like a 6 week
Okay.
giant road trip where I was gone. And this one felt mini because I was only going for 2 weeks. But I guess that's really only mini to me. So it's a regular size tour, I guess.
I know. I think the farthest west I saw was Pittsburgh, if on the map.
Yeah, Pittsburgh. I'll be in Pittsburgh. Comics Pro is that weekend, so I'll be there for Comics Pro. And then I am dipping into West Virginia, but I'm not doing a signing. I'm going to a dishware store to buy a bunch of dishes, um, just on my own. But yeah, unfortunately, not further west than Pittsburgh for any of my signings.
So, well, I'll have to look at that date and see. I'm in Columbus, so I'm not too far,
Okay,
Columbus, Ohio. So I might be able to make a Pittsburgh trip happen.
awesome.
So, well, Ed, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about comics with me. Gang, go check out the displays. Go check out Predator, and then all obviously check out all of Ed's past work, and
Everything. Yes.
make sure you follow along with Ed online so you can stay up to date with the new announcements. I'm excited to hear about crime books and things like that. So, but thanks again for just taking some time to talk about comics with me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on, man.
Absolutely. With that being said, gang, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.